We're doing a deep dive on the Family Matters Precon and upgrading it into a powerhouse by making 25 changes for less than the price of the original deck.
I'm Mia, and I had Olive Garden for lunch today.
I'm BZ. I have never seen a single Fast and Furious movie. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. There's no Fast and Furious movies on Card Kingdom. Can't buy Olive Garden on there, but guess what? You can buy Magic cards. Probably the thing you care about most out of those three things, and Card Kingdom has them all.
They have Bloomburrow singles, they have Bloomburrow Precons, including this one, and they have sealed stuff, plus a big variety of other types of cards and cards accessories, so go check them out. Tell them we sent you. We have a link down below and a homepage. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order, which includes the new speared animal sleeves that are really, really great for Bloomburrow. I mean, they're super cute. They are fantasy animals, and I think they go so well with the Bloomburrow theme.
It's one for one. If you need goofy animal sleeves to put on your goofy animal deck, this is the only option. Trust me, it's the only option anywhere. We're also sponsored by Moxfield, but not yet. Figure it out later.
Liars.
And also, we have Patreon. If you want to see exclusive gameplay with us on Spell Table, playing with some of our content creator buddies or some musical guests, you can check that out for a small price, which is well worth keeping us alive.
It also keeps the cats alive, and you know they really love you, and we love you guys too.
And you know they're struggling every day. So this is our first deep dive into a single Precon in its own video in a pretty long time, and I want to take a real deep look at our favorite of the Bloomburrow Precons, the Family Matters, commanded by Zinnia. So I guess the very first thing we're going to do when we look at this Precon, a lot of people have the question, should I change the commander to the other alternate commander option? So we're going to read both commanders, then we'll give you our take on that, and then we'll get into the deck itself. So the commander that starts out is Zinnia, Valley's Voice, blue, red, white for a 1/3 flyer. It gets +X/+O, where X is the number of other creatures you control with base power 1, and creature spells you cast have offspring 2. So you can pay 2 mana if you cast a creature, get a second version of it as a 1/1, and this deck's going to have ETB triggers or static abilities that are now twice as much happening twice as much thanks to Zinnia.
I love the fact that they gave Jeskai like some legs, some real power in this cycle of Precons. But you also have to look at the other commander. The alternate commander is Arthur, Marigold Knight, 2 red, white, blue for a 4/5 with haste. When him and at least one other creature attack, you look at the top 6 of your library. You could put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, rest on the bottom in a random order, and you return that creature to its owner's hand at the end of combat. So we're thinking, should you actually switch commanders? Because sometimes the decks work better if you just switch the commanders. In this case, I don't think so. Arthur just works better as his own deck because he wants a lot of creatures, larger creatures at the top of your deck so you can kind of cheat them out and bounce them back to your hand, while Zinnia really does a lot better with like base power 1, which is what a lot of the offspring tokens come in as.
Yeah, there's a lot of token making in this deck, and Arthur doesn't really care about that at all. Arthur, I want like humongous creatures, maybe with cycling or something, so that when they return, I can just get rid of them and I don't have to play them again. Like, you really want to go as big as possible with Arthur. Play a few dinky guys early to get that attack trigger because he needs one other thing to attack with him. I think Arthur's got legs for sure. Arthur's a pretty strong card. It would be too much of a facelift to upgrade this Precon into an Arthur deck, so I recommend just cutting him and then build an entire different deck around Arthur if you want. So we're going to go with Zinnia for this. You can get this deck on Card Kingdom right now for $40, and we're making 25 changes. Pretty solid upgrade. For less than 40, we're actually a fair bit under 40. This is going to end up being, if the deck is 40, these budget ads were about a little under 30, I would say. So for less than 70, you get a very, very functional, upgraded, juiced deck. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get an overview of the deck as it comes out of the box.
The main overview of this is that you want to use the abilities of entering the battlefield that a lot of creatures have, and you also want to be paying the 2 for Zinnia's offspring ability to get double those triggers, plus getting 1/1 copies of all those creatures makes your commander way bigger, so you can punch in for commander damage while also getting a lot of ETB triggers to just kind of value out your opponents.
So we have some statistical breakdowns because that makes everything more fun. There are 11 ramp spells in this deck. We have 14 removal spells, which is pretty good. 4 board wipes. I was pretty shocked. We are not going to be touching the board wipes category. 4 is plenty. We have 10 card draw. That's something we're going to take a look at a little bit. I feel like 10 is a little bit low. When I start upgrading Precons, it's fine for a Precon, but also these card draw spells are not of the highest quality. There's 20 enters the battlefield triggers. That gives you a pretty good idea that that's the main thing this deck wants to do. And we can definitely keep that identity going into our upgraded version. Cards that make 1 power tokens, there's 13, so that's sort of like a sub-theme, I would say. They all just benefit Zinnia. And there are only 4 ways to make special tokens in this deck. Tokens that are like hard to make otherwise, or copies of creatures that are tokens. Offspring would be an example. I want to up that. I think that's one of the coolest things to build around with Zinnia. And then it has 38 lands. We're probably not going to stay at 38 because that's kind of high.
I think so too. I just think that this deck really shines by giving you the token creature that you can make due to the Offspring ability, and then just being able to populate those. Populate's such a cool mechanic, but it's so hard to do in Commander because it's so hard to get that ball rolling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so we're going to go through category by category and give you the exact 1-for-1 change that we are making in each section, and we're going to go in the same order. So we're going to start with Ramp. Now, one card we cut was Ornithopter of Paradise. I understand that you can Offspring it and then have 2 of them, but I don't love the 2-mana Matador creatures if I can help it. I think the summoning sickness is so much worse than like an artifact. This deck does care about creatures, but I don't know. I wanted to put in something else, so I put in Knight of the White Orchid. I think this is like very similar. The ramp is permanent. It doesn't just tap for mana, and getting copies is just as easy. I think this is an easy switch, right?
I think it's way nicer to have those lands come in, especially if you do find something random in the future that you want to like flicker with, for instance. You might be able to get more triggers of those. But in general, you're in Jeskai. It's not like you're in green where ramp in land type is plentiful. And I feel like Ornithopter really, of Paradise at least, really shines when you have like 4 and 5 colors, when you're really thirsting for those colors. But you're in 3 colors, and I think it's easier to just get the lands that you want in that point.
Yeah, and there's no artifact synergies in this deck. I think it's a pretty easy cut. The next cut is Restoration Angel. I get that we have a lot of ETBs, but I think Restoration Angel, like specifically this card, is just not that high of power level. 4 mana for a flicker, or in this instance with Zinnia out, 6 mana for 2 flickers, just feels okay. It really doesn't feel like we're getting away with anything.
I don't think so either. Scampering Surveyor, though, can really help. I like this little guy because you don't need any specific colors to cast him, and you can take lands and put them into your hand.
Yeah, this is a blink deck, so when you put the ETBs of these creatures like Knight of the White Orchid and Scampering Surveyor, sure, Ornithopter of Paradise can ramp you when you Offspring it, but now all the flicker cards you have don't do anything because it doesn't have an ETB. So I feel like this is a perfect way. And I also just think that Scampering Surveyor is kind of slept on. I think it's a really good budget card. We don't have a 4 mana like budget solemn. It's got the same, initial text of getting the land. And I feel like people just don't play it. I think it's so cool. I'm happy to have it. In the situations where I have extra mana, I'm happy to pay 6 mana to permanently ramp 2 lands into play. I love Scampering Surveyor.
The next card that we're going to cut is a card from Bloomburrow, but I don't think it works very well in this deck. It's Plume-Creed Escort. It flashes in to give something hexproof, but I would never want to flash it in and then pay Offspring to give 2 things hexproof when you're in Jeskai, and you could be running different types of interaction to do that instead of paying the premium to have it on a body.
I mean, when are 2 things going to be targeted at the same time? You're never going to get the benefit of that. It's nice to have the option to just make an extra 1/1, but that feels low compared to the cards we could be putting into this deck.
I completely agree. Instead of that, though, we're going to put in Claim Jumper. It's kind of like Knight of the White Orchid because it's going to ramp you, but if you have less lands, you're going to be able to do it again, and paying that extra 2 mana to get a second one of those ETB triggers is super nice to have.
So in some world where there's a green player and they're going completely ham sandwich, you could pay 5 mana to get 4 lands. That could happen. I think most likely you're going to get 2 or 3, and you might not even want to always Offspring this, but I still think it's nice to have permanent ramp on a creature.
I think just having the option is the best point of this because, sometimes you are really far behind, and 2 mana is not that much to spend to get that extra value to like snowball you even to the middle or way above your opponents.
Did you say having options?
I love having options.
Like with what?
With Moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck. Moxfield has so many cool new features. One of them is that you can link all of your new social links, whether that's like Twitter or Facebook, or I think they even have Spotify and Patreon. You can put those links into your Moxfield profile. So if anyone wants to check you out anywhere else, like our profile, for instance, you can find our YouTube there and everywhere else you can reach us.
Yeah, you can even put down your color identity, just a nice cool way so that if people are looking at you, they can figure out what kind of brewer you are. I'm definitely an Abzan type of brewer, but I think us together just make Wooburg, right?
I think so. I mean, we brew a little bit of everything. So you can go check it out if you look at our profile. You can actually search in there and see the decks that we've been brewing up the most.
Moxfield is always coming up with cool new stuff, and we're going to move on to more cool stuff. We have removal now, a fair bit of changes in this category. First cut is Aetherize. I do think if you're playing this Precon against the other Precons, Aetherize is kind of brutal. It feels like some of the decks can't beat it. It's like really annoying. But once I get out to regular Commander and I'm just playing this in random pods of mid power, I don't think Aetherize is very good. I haven't had good success with it.
I don't think so either. It's just also really expensive to do that effect. It's like, okay, I'm going to wait till you attack. And then I'm also going to hold up 4 mana to do this if you attack me particularly. Because if you're attacking anyone else, I don't care. But I think it's just so situational. You know what I mean?
I know that you can bounce attackers going at other players, but why would you want to do that?
Yeah, it's just extra damage going at them and not at me, so why would I do that?
Yeah, I feel like this card can be, like, you can definitely hold it up and have the mana be wasted, so I don't love that. I do love Volatile Stormdrake. If we want removal, let's try to make as much of it on creatures as humanly possible. I know we want instants in general and ways to interact at instant speed, but, like, Aetherize for Volatile Stormdrake is sick. You can play it at 2 mana 3/2, you choose a creature, then they exchange control. Then you can pay up to 4 energy and steal it if its mana value is the energy you paid. So with this, you can go cast it, pay for the offspring, and then use the copy that enters, whichever one you want to trigger first, it doesn't matter, to take a 1-drop. Then the second one, you can take, since you'll have banked 3 energy for taking a 1-drop or whatever, you can now take a 7-drop or any combination of that. And I think that's really cool. Plus, let's not forget that with Volatile Stormdrake, you can just switch the creatures and destroy the original, which is maybe what you want to do with the copy, because the copy is just a 1/1.
Yeah, that is not a bad trade overall. It's better than like a Swan Song. At least they're only getting a 1/1 in this case.
Oh, I guess I missaid it. I misspoke. You give them the 1/1, and then you use the 3/2 to take something that you don't want to kill, that you don't want to steal, you just kill it. If that makes sense to you, drop a like, because I think we got it. Volatile Stormdrake is good in this deck. We're also going to cut Siege Gang Commander. I think this was one of the few cards in there that was supposed to go with the Arthur side of the deck. It does make 1/1s, and offspringing it does give you a ton of creatures. Just 5 mana, I wasn't necessarily feeling it at that rate, where, like, I'm not really going to be sacrificing goblins a ton. You know, the extra Siege Gang Commander itself is redundant. You just want the extra 3 1/1 tokens. How do you feel about it?
I don't think it's great. I think that there are a couple cards that go really well with it in the deck, like the Agate Instigators, which have ETB triggers of when other creatures enter, you deal damage. And it's really great with that card. But I don't think that the power boost for Zinnia in particular is where I want to be with this deck, because I'm not building this more Voltron-y. I'm building this more of a, like, kind of Voltron-y by proxy.
Bonus, yeah,
not by actually what I'm trying to do with this deck. So instead, I'm going to be putting in Aerial Extortionist. This functions as removal. You get a flyer in the air so you can poke a little bit if you want to, and every time it attacks, you get those triggers again. Yeah,
when it hits a player, you get to do the same thing. You get to exile their thing, and they can recast it. But it even gets better when you stack 2 of them. This is not a redundant text box, because now not only are you hitting twice as many things, twice as much, but whenever they cast a spell from anywhere other than their hand, you draw 2 cards, because each of the Aerial Extortionist triggers. So it is a little bit pricey to do at 7 mana, but instead of just getting a bunch of 1/1s and a 2/2, you get a 4/3, a 1/1, temporary removal on 2 things, and now when they try to recast those things, or someone just decides to play their commander or flashback a spell, you're drawing 2 cards apiece. I love it. I know you love Aerial Extortionist. He's a very cool guy. And just having that static effect, I think, will really get people to think about what they're casting and try and focus those, and like kind of give you time to build up your game plan. I also think that maybe just having 2 Aerial Extortionists in play might sort of cancel it out in everybody's heads, because when there's 1 in play, I kind of want to kill it before I recast my thing. But when there's 2 in play, am I really going to, I might not even have 2 removal spells, and then at that point it's like, well, I need to get my thing back out. Whatever, draw 2 cards, and me as the Aerial Extortionist controller just goes, okay, thank you. I mean, I also just think in general that if there's 1 is okay, I can get rid of that. 2 is a little bit defeating, as you said. So it's not my problem. Yeah, so it's not like the table's gonna band together to help the one player who's just casting a lot of stuff not from their hand, right? Yeah, it's like when there's 2 Ristics and the table just evolves into chaos. We also cut Stolen by the Fae. It does make a lot of 1/1s, but if we can get 1/1s on creatures, that's fine. Again, we didn't super prioritize the Voltron thing. I think that'll just sort of happen by nature of you playing the game. So I cut Stolen by the Fae. I don't think it's that great. It's also sorcery speed. I think so. We could put in Fury instead, though. I think this is a super cool ad. I think this is one of the most expensive ads on this list at $5 or $6. But it's really cool because you can evoke something, pay the 2, get a second copy that'll stick around, and you'll get those triggers twice. This card is unreal in this deck. I get to pay, like you said, 0 mana, then 2 mana. So 2 mana total, divide 8 damage, and keep a 1/1 with Double Strike. Or you can also go the route of pay it for 5 mana, deal 4 damage, or pay it for 7 mana, keep the 3/3 and the 1/1, and then deal 8 damage. This is going to just mow down creatures. You know, this was the most expensive ad in the deck, but I had to do it. This is like what gets my brewing juices flowing. I wish there was some more cards like this. Solitude's a little bit out of our price range, but this is super sweet with Zinnia.
I think this is so cool, and I never thought that I would say that Fury is really good in Commander, because it's definitely a 1v1 card, but in this deck specifically, it's a great card.
Oh yeah, I guess minor rules thing. When you evoke a creature, you do get to keep the token copy, even though you evoked the original with Zinnia. That's just a weird rules thing that I had to look up. Next up, we're cutting Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive. It makes our one top power tokens that we're making unblockable, but that's not our win con. And if we make them any bigger than that, they're not 1 power, so they're not unblockables. I think this card is just kind of bad in this deck.
Yeah, if you're trying to go that Voltron route, it could be okay, but since that's not what we're focusing on, we want more ETBs, we'd rather do something else like Mystic Confluence. This is great as a counterspell. It's a little expensive, sure, but you can bounce stuff back to their owner's hands, whether that's theirs or yours, if you want more ETB triggers. And just drawing a card, if you have nothing to do and you're just holding up that mana, 3 cards overall, not a bad rate.
Even though we are a creature deck, I do think we still want some instant speed interaction, and I think every blue deck wants a couple counterspells. So that's what this ad and the next one are going to be. What's our next cut?
Our next cut is Jacked Rabbit. I think that the flavor of this is amazing. However, I just don't really see it working with the ETB triggers that we want in this deck.
It kind of just gets huge. It feels like a card for another deck. And we added Negate. Negate's another solid budget counterspell and gets you out of some really tough situations where if there's a board wipe, it's going to send you back to the Stone Age. You just need to get rid of it. I think Negate and Mystic Confluence are a good start. And maybe even if you upgrade this deck further, you want to add one more counterspell into it.
But moving on, we have to go to card draw because we're going to be casting a bunch of stuff, but we're going to need to keep refilling our hands to cast more things. One of the things in here is Cut a Deal. I'm so sick of putting this in. I don't want to give my opponents cards. I don't care that I'm in white, but because I'm in blue too, which means I have a lot of card draw that I can get, and I don't need to give my opponents card draw when I am the only ones requiring cards.
Right. In terms of from a power perspective of I'm trying to make this deck better, I don't think Cut a Deal would ever make it into any deck I've ever built, ever, regardless of what time we were in, because I don't think white card draw has ever been bad enough that I want to play Cut a Deal. I just don't want to give my opponent stuff. It's very simple. I want to add, though, Ethereal Investigator. Now, this is the card that I guess is also a spiritual replacement for Siege Gang Commander, because this thing goes off when you start offspringing it. It's a 4-mana 2/3 ETB. You investigate for each opponent you have. That's 3 clues. You've already got 1 flyer and 3 clues. And then when you draw your second card each turn, you get a 1/1 flyer. So now I'm going to pay 6 mana. I'm going to get a 2/3, a 1/1, 6 clues. Then I'm going to crack one of the clues and immediately get 2 tokens. This thing just makes an army, and it never stops. It just keeps going.
I mean, overall, that is a lot of mana to pay up front, but I'm okay with that because this is a very cool ad, and even if you can only do 1 around and you don't have Zinnia out or you can't pay that offspring, that's still okay because you're still making 3 clues and you have that static ability. So if you can draw any more cards, you will be getting those 1/1s.
Yeah, it's like it replaces the Siege Gang Saka thing, deal 2 damage with pay 2 mana, draw a card, and I think that's much better. Plus, then you start generating more tokens over the course of the game. Next cut is Chart a Course. Chart a Course is not bad, and I think there's a world where you leave this in because it's the most okay fillery card ever. It's basically a 2-mana draw 2 as long as you punch with Zinnia. It's just not on theme. It's not a creature. It doesn't help get creatures. We don't care about the discard. I think it's an easy card to leave in, but it's also a really easy card to cut, if that makes sense.
I think we could do much better. One of them is Mole Drifter. You can be evoking this, like how we mentioned you can evoke Fury, so you will get those 4 cards for 5 mana, and you'll keep around that 1/1 Mole Drifter, so if you have anything like Populate in your deck, you can keep copying that and getting those extra triggers.
Yeah, in this deck, you should really never cast Mole Drifter for 4 and a blue, because I'd so much rather do the same thing with Zinnia out, pay 4 and a blue, get a 1/1 and draw 4. It's just wow. Mole Drifter, super sweet. I wish there was a little bit more evoke stuff you could do. There is also Ingot Chewer you could play. It's red to evoke and you destroy an artifact. Definitely a playable card. I almost added it. So it's on the fringe. You could definitely, if you have one in your collection and you want to try it, that's definitely good in this deck. We also got Pull from Tomorrow, another fine draw spell. But again, I don't care about the fact that I'm discarding and I don't have any instant or sorcery synergies or cost reducers, so I'd rather just turn into a creature.
The next creature that we're putting in is Welcoming Vampire. I think this is amazing for this deck. You're going to be offspringing so much, and if you offspring this, you're going to get 2 cards every single time something powered 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control. I mean, it's once per turn, but still, you are going to be drawing a ton of cards too every single time that happens, and your entire deck is revolving around these like little creatures, so you could do that basically every turn.
And on top of that, the biggest bummer when normally playing with Welcoming Vampire is that it doesn't give you anything right away, but when you offspring it, one of them sees the other one enter, and you will get a card right away because it's a 1/1. Thanks, Zinnia. You make so many cards that much better. We're going to cut Fortune Teller's Talent as well. It's an enchantment, so this deck doesn't care. It doesn't generate 1/1s. It doesn't make tokens. It just kind of helps cast the top card of our library. Feels like a card from a different deck, so bye-bye.
Instead, you could put an Idol of Oblivion. This helps you draw cards if you make tokens, which we're always going to be doing. And you can make a big boy, a 10/10, if you really want to, but we're mostly going to be doing it for the card draw.
Yeah, the 10/10's not irrelevant because we will have ways, as you will see in our fun category coming up, that we have populate that we're going to be adding. So let's go to enters triggers, creatures that are going to enter and trigger something. So of course, when we double it up with offspring, they are twice as good. Mia, what's the first cut?
The first cut is Circuit Mender. This does a little bit when it enters and a little bit when it dies, but it's not that good, and I wouldn't really want to be populating or offspringing this in general. So instead, I'd rather put in White Mainline. I could bounce something back to my hand so I can offspring it again and get double the value off of it, or I guess quadruple the value.
White Mainline is potentially one of the stronger cards you could add. If you are looking to power up this deck to the max, I think one avenue you could take is the White Mane Lion with like Prairie Drake route, because when you start offspringing and bouncing, it gets really, really close to going infinite. We're not going infinite with our Precon upgrade here on a budget, but White Mane Lion is still fantastic because what you can do is pay 4 mana, so you've offspringed it. You get the White Mane Lion first, then you bounce a creature that you control with an ETB, so you can offspring it later from your hand or save it from a removal spell. Then the clone of White Mane Lion bounces the original White Mane Lion, so you're back to where you started, and you can save your creatures and generate more value and just kind of recycle them over and over.
I mean, White Mane Lion is such a value piece, whether you do it once or you do it in the combo. I've been Galadriel, and I love doing it for both, so it's a really good add in here.
It's a super modal card. What do we cut next?
The next card we're going to cut is Luminous Broodmoth, though I do love the fact that it is reprinted in here. That's a little bit of money. Unfortunately, I don't think we can get the most value out of it. It says when your stuff dies, they come back with flying counters on it, but we don't really have a ways to get our own stuff to die, so I feel like we're losing a little bit of the value.
Yeah, I don't like playing these cards without a proactive way to use them. They're kind of just saying, hey, you know, a board wipe's going to be tricky. You better do something. But there's no extra value, and your opponent gets to play around it. So usually for these cards to make my deck, I would also want, in this case, a sack outlet or a way to remove counters or something going on where my creatures are going to die, and then I can bring them back, you know, proactively on my own terms and not just wait for some percentage of board wipes. So Luminous Broodmoth, not quite for this deck. However, a card that is for this deck is Whirler Rogue, and this one plays a little bit into the Voltron route. It works well with Zinnia. The copies are sort of redundant, but kind of not really. It makes 2 Thopters. So if you I keep saying, I want to say squad, but it's offspring. If you make a little baby Whirler Rogue, you're going to end up with 2 Whirler Rogues and 4 1/1 Thopters. Now, the Whirler Rogues themselves, the text is redundant, but you get an extra set of 2 artifacts to now make an extra thing unblockable. And the main thing you're going to be making unblockable is probably Zinnia. So we got the same army in the can, you know, value as like a Siege Gang, which we cut. But we're also getting, all right, I just made 5 1/1s. Now I'll make my commander unblockable right now. You take at least 6, probably more.
I'm never mad to see a Whirler Rogue copied. I've copied them multiple times, my Door to Nothingness deck, and it's always a pretty good value piece. I'm always very surprised to see how well it goes.
I also love that you can make other creatures, other players' creatures unblockable just in the middle of combat. And you don't have to announce that or anything. You just have to go, oh, you're attacking with that Inferno Titan? I'll make it unblockable on the other person. And they just go, what? Huh? What? And you're just like, Whirler Rogue, baby.
The instant speed, you know, offensive and defensive.
It's very offensive. Next up, we're going to cut Illusory Ambusher. It's a 4/1 that when it gets dealt damage, you draw that many cards. I have to wait around, and things have to go very right for me. And not being able to, like, when you can't flash this in to, you know, chump block and draw cards, it feels pretty bad, because then your options are do nothing with your 5 mana or flash it in anyway, and now your opponents just know about it. Not a fan of Illusory Ambusher, but I am a fan of Molten Gatekeeper. Just a super simple card. When your creatures enter, it pings your opponents for 1. Making 2 of them is great. Now I've got a spread out threat that you have to answer, that as I just play the game, you guys are going to get drained out. Plus the nice Unearth, where if you see a big turn coming up, you got a Whirler Rogue in your hand and Zinnia in play, unearth this thing, then go off and deal like 7 damage.
I love these types of effects. I feel like sometimes with your very tiny creatures, it might be hard to chip in damage if you don't have Zinnia on the field. So being able to win in non-combat ways really helps help speed the game along and turn things into your favor.
Yeah, what's our next card? I know you don't like this card.
Our next card is Shield Broker. It's a creature that says you can steal creatures and put shield counters on them and then as long as they have shield counters on them, you have them. But as long as that shield counter is gone, they go right back to the opponent. I feel like this is so just temporary. It's not. It's so easy to get around. It's like, okay, it deals a little bit of damage. It'll go back to you if you like ping them for 1 damage or there's a fight spell or something. It's just like, it's almost nothing, right? It's such a temporary. It might as well say until end of turn or something.
I like playing this card, probably in the version of this deck that has Goblin Bombardment in it. You can keep Luminous Broodmoth, and you can keep Shield Broker, because now they say this says kill a creature and throw a damage at somebody instead, where you don't have to worry about them going back. We're going to add Witty Roastmaster, though. It's basically the same thing as the Molten Gatekeeper. It's a little bit worse because of no Unearth, but it's still got all the value of go ahead and Offspring it right away, deal the damage right away for your troubles, and now everything you play is just going to be annoying. It's just annoying, and it's a solid way to win the game if games go a little longer.
I'm such a fan of having non-combat win cons. I feel like everyone needs to bake in at least a couple into their decks just to make sure that they have ways to win if there's a board stall and they're not drawing their board wipes or their interaction.
I think that's super true, and that definitely helps us get extra kind of almost free wins in the grindier games because we always bake that stuff into our decks. So we're going to move to the next category, which is 1 power tokens. There's only a couple, but I thought this was relevant. We are going to cut Boss's Chauffeur. This is another card that goes in the weird Zinnia deck that has sack outlets in it. Because if I can't control when I get these tokens and I can't dodge a Swords to Plowshares or something with a sack outlet, I don't want to play this card.
I think so too. I mean, it's very easy to add in a sack outlet to your decks to make it that one if you want to go that route. But the one that we're making is just kind of flooding the board and making a bunch of Offspring tokens, and I don't think that's the way we want to do it. So instead, we're going to put in Call the Copper Codes, because we're going to make a ton of little 1 power tokens to make Zinnia very big, and oops, I guess you're getting hit for 20 in the air with my commander, right?
Yeah, this could easily lead to commander damage, and also as an army in a can, you can just attack somebody. This could make 20 tokens. It's not even unreasonable. If your opponents have 6, 6, and 8 creatures, there you go. That's even more than that's 20 creatures just right away. And then you can send them all at one person if you have a way to pump them in your hand. Game over, basically. I like all the Copper Codes. I really like, when I want to generate tokens, I want to generate 1,000,000 tokens. And the next card, what is our next cut?
Our next cut is Thopter Engineer. This does make a couple of 1/1, little Thopters, which does help our game plan. But I feel like we don't have enough artifact creatures to get haste or anything like that, so I feel like that text is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, I'm giving a couple of Thopters haste, and maybe if you put in Whirler Rogue, you have a couple of those, but we don't really want to use those for their intended purpose of just smacking.
Yeah, if you want 1/1s, you got to go to my man Siege Gang Lieutenant. Now, I understand that I cut Siege Gang Commander. I think this card is so much better than that. We get 4 mana, and then we get a 2/2, and then every turn we have our commander, which hopefully is most turns. It's a very cheap commander to play. We get 2 more goblins. So if we do the dream of play Zinnia and then squad this, we get a 2/2, a 1/1, and every combat we get 4 more 1/1s. That is repeatable. It just goes. We don't have to spend any mana, and we still get the nice bonus little sack outlet if we really need to deal 1 damage. But this, to me, vastly superior to Siege Gang Lieutenant.
Plus, when we have Witty Roastmaster and all of the non-combat ways to win in here, I mean, I feel like we might win the game before they even have a chance to build up a board to attack us.
Yeah, they won't even get to do anything. I think there's definitely games where even if you just go Zinnia into this, your opponents are under a serious amount of pressure. I think the tokens gain haste from it too, so it's just like beat down central.
But if we want to talk about special tokens, how about we think about a couple ways to make those? One of the cuts that we're going to do is Echoing Assault. I think this card is very cool. It's an enchantment that makes 1/1s of attacking creatures, and then they just go away at the end of, I think, combat, right?
End of turn, end of combat.
Yeah, something like that. But overall, I'd really prefer to be populating tokens that don't have to attack, because I usually feel like the 1/1s are the things that I want to be populating or making copies of. I don't want to attack because they're too valuable to me. I don't want to be sending them off to the ether where everyone goes, yeah, I have a 2/2. I can block that really quickly.
Yeah, we're going to add a very simple card, Wake the Reflections. I think it's the card with the least Oracle text as far as having any Oracle text at all. It's just 1 mana, populate. We have so many tokens that are going to be special creatures that we pay 2 or 3 or 5 mana for. When we offspring them, now we can just get an extra copy of them for 1. I feel like this is a staple in Zinnia decks. It's so cool. This card alone makes me want to play Zinnia because it's a really budget card. It's worth absolutely nothing. Whatever the least amount of money a card can be worth in Magic, this is what that's worth. And it's so good in this deck.
I love Populate as a mechanic. We did an Oathbreaker thing, and one of my deck was like kind of around Wake the Reflections, but overall, it's so hard to get that first step of creating the token to populate at that point, because you don't want to do the easy tokens of like the 1/1 goblin or, you know, the 2/2 bird or the thopter.
It's not worth it.
Yeah, so instead it's like, oh, I don't know, why don't I get another solemnite? Why don't I get another like selfless spirit? Something that's really valuable to me.
Yep, and we also obviously mentioned before, but we're finally cutting him in this part. Arthur Marigold Knight is gone in favor of Kaith, Famed Mechanist. Now, Kaith is so good for this deck that I wouldn't have complained if that was the secondary commander, because this says that your creatures have Fabricate 1, so when the non-token creatures enter, you can make a servo, which is probably what you're going to do, or put a counter on them. That's fine, but extra servo, extra 1/1, buff for Zinnia, and then this thing can either proliferate or populate. That's great if you want to go the counters route, and if you happen to build up some, whatever. But populate, make another thing on command over and over. It's just, your opponents are going to have so much crap to deal with that they're not going to be able to keep up.
This works so well with this. I feel like when they do a lot of the precons, they want to have like different strategies as the alt commander. But I feel like Kaith was so slept on. You know what I mean?
Kaith wasn't given a lot of
respect.
Well, you know what? Kaith was in a really hype set. So Kaith maybe was the 50th coolest card in MH3, one of the coolest sets ever. If Kaith was in this precon, I think people would be more hyped about it. But guess what? Now that we've upgraded it, she basically is. We're going to cut Murmuration as well. I love this card, but I don't think it's exactly what we're looking to do. We're not trying to storm off as much as we're trying to just get value.
Instead of this, we're going to put in Gired's Belligerence. It's going to deal damage equal to X, where X is the amount of mana you pay in. But if creatures would die, you instead get to populate. And you're going to be picking off everybody's 1/1s, right? It's just like, okay, here's a goblin here, here's a vampire here, and oh, I'm just going to populate my best thing and get so many more ETB triggers than you.
Yeah, it's super nice to have. I think this is less of a, you know, you're not going to be killing 6/6s with this thing unless it's an emergency, which you can do. You're going to be picking off all the small Lana Dorks and whatever else and just saying, okay, get another Mole Drifter, get another Mole Drifter, get another Fury. Like, oh, absolutely brutal. I love Gired's Belligerence. Another card that's just dirt cheap. We're also going to cut Rapid Augmenter. It's like a beatdown kind of thing. It feels like almost an alternate way to deal a bunch of damage aside from Zinnia. But the way we're taking this deck, we don't really want that. So how about Rootborn Defenses? A little bit of protection from board wipes, but we can also use it proactively to make our best creature again as a token.
I think that this is such a fun way to build tokens, right? I feel like this takes it in a whole new direction. Usually we're so used to the artifact tokens, the 1/1s, the little guys, you know, just the little guys. But
these are different little guys. These are babies.
And I'm just so happy to see that this is just making very cool stuff out of stuff you already are owning, you know?
All right, time for the lands. And we're going to only cut a few. We're going to cut Thriving Bluff, Thriving Isle, and Thriving Heath. I don't think these lands are that great. They all enter tapped. They're only dual lands. I think when you power up these decks, you want to cut out some of the tap lands. I think the mana base was good, but we're going to just improve it a tiny bit.
We have some very cool ads here, and I feel like 2 of them are from MH3, which we love. One of them is Perilous Landscape. This is the Jeskai cycling one from MH3. This will either help you find the land that you need, or you can just cycle it to get an extra card, which we all love to do.
Right, but it also enters untapped, so you don't have to pay too much of a cost. If you really need a land, and you really need to cast a 3-drop on turn 3, this thing is not going to put you that far behind. There's also Prairie Stream, just a land that enters untapped, makes blue and white. Those are the 2 main colors of this deck. So if you want to put some more lands into this deck, make sure they're blue-white. This deck wants more blue-white duels than it does like Boros duels.
And we cannot have an NN video without talking about an MDFC. Witch Enchanter is going to go great in here because you can either offspring the creature, or it can come in as an untapped land if you pay 3 life.
Plus, this lets us sort of functionally reduce the number of lands by 1 without actually reducing the number of lands by 1, because of course MDFCs are lands and spells. Who would have thought? So our total changes was 25, as we said, and the total spent was $27.21, which if you buy the Precon for $40, that brings us to $67.21 for what I think is a very functional synergistic deck. And if you got the Precon for even less than that, just lower the number by whatever the difference was.
So to go over the actual stats of the deck now, the ramp is 13 ramp cards. That is +2 than the original. Removal is 16 +2. Board wipes 4. We kept it exactly the same. That's already kind of a lot. 11 card draw, which is +1. Enters the battlefield triggers 24, which is +4, which I'm very happy to see that number go up. 1 power tokens 11. That's about the same. Special tokens 7. That's +3, which because we wanted populate in here, I love that. I love the fact that we can play populate. And lands 37 +1 MDFC, so functionally 38.
And I'm really happy with the way we restructured the card draw, and we restructured structured the 1 power tokens. The numbers are close, but I think the card quality is so much higher. We've got Mole Drifters instead of like Charticore, so I think it's going to make a huge difference. If you want the best cards to add into this deck that were already in there and you want to know what those are, or you want to see what non-budget cards we would add to this deck or the other Bloomburrow Precons, there's an entire video made just for you right here.